Hey everybody, I'm Anna Huthmaker with Huthmaker Violins, and I apologize, I'm a little bit late. We are actually doing a live Facebook video for Make Music Day. I want to say welcome to all of you to Make Music Day. Also, happy Father's Day to you, happy summer solstice. And today for Make Music Day, I'm going to do a session on sight reading. And I'm hoping this is going to work okay because I'm having technical difficulties, which isn't surprising. I'm a musician. All this computer stuff is a little crazy to me. But we're going to go for it and make sure that this is recording and hope that it works for you. So when it comes to sight reading, it's something that I'm really passionate about. I grew up as a young musician taking 1,000 different auditions, just like a lot of you. And sight reading is something that it's really interesting because it not only judges what level of musician you truly are, it separates the men from the boys, the women from the girls when it comes to an audition. I always tell people I can teach anything, anybody. I can teach a puppy, a kitten, a monkey how to play the piece of music. But can they really play at that level? That's what sight reading tells us. So to go to an audition, to do your best, to score like crazy, you have to really be good at sight reading. Now, I won't lie to you, this is a really in-depth dive into sight reading. I'm going to talk about how much time and energy you can spend on every little part of it. And the truth is, it's going to be up to you. What will you use? What will you take away? What will you decide is important for you to know? But I promise you this, if you really take the time and effort and energy to learn to sight read well, it will crack your musical technique wide open. Not only will you be amazing at auditions, you'll be amazing at gigs, you'll become somebody that people want to hire. I promise you it is a skill well worth learning. Now, I'm going to start by saying that, and I hope you can see some of this, I'm going to read a lot of it out loud to you anyway, but most people have a completely wrong approach to sight reading. Now, I want you to picture what you did the last time you were at audition, you sight read. So probably they said, okay, you have 30 seconds or 60 seconds, turn the sheet of paper around and study your music. And I bet anything you sat there with your violin, your trumpet, your flute, your cello or bass, and you kind of fingered it along in your head. You went, okay, from the beginning. That is the absolute worst way to approach sight reading, because the thing about sight reading is there is a time limit. And the truth about sight reading is that when someone gives you a piece of music to sight read, you actually already know 98% of the notes, the rhythms, the things that are on the piece of paper. You do not want to waste your time looking at those things. But that's exactly what happens if you start from the beginning. If you start and you're just like, measure 1, measure 2, measure 3. By the time you get halfway through, your time is up. Or by the time you get all the way through, let's assume you make it that far, you've already forgotten a lot of the important things or you haven't noticed. Your job is to look at a sight reading piece of music and to pull out the stuff that might mess with you. Pull out the stuff that's going to trip you up. That is what you need to know. The rest of it, don't worry about it. You know that there's one beat and a quarter note. You know there's 4 beats and a whole note. You got to pick out the fancy stuff that's going to mess with you. So how do you do that? We're going to get to that in just a second because we're going to tear apart all the different things about sight reading. But one of the things that I want you to actually think about is that sight reading is all about short-term memory. When you walk out of an audition, I do not care if you remember what key that sight reading was in. I do not care if you remember any part of it. I do, however, care that you sucked in the music fast enough, you remembered it long enough to play it and let it come out of your hands. So short-term memory is the secret of the game at this point. And for me, I have found that one of the things that really helps me to be able to connect to a piece of music is to think about it spatially. All right, so let's pretend you're looking at a piece of music. This is your sight reading excerpt. Oh goodness, that would be bad, right? But I want you to practice taking your eyeballs and skimming it as fast as you can, top to bottom, and picking out the stuff that sticks out, the stuff that might surprise you. Do not start here and slowly read and think about it, but you've got to think spatially. And what I want you to be able to do is to look at a piece of music. And then if I close the book, I want you to be able to say to yourself, oh, There was an accidental halfway through the second line. There was an A flat at the end of the third line. I need you to think about it spatially. Let those things stick into your head. When you approach it like that, I promise you're going to make your life way, way easier, and what comes out of your sight reading will be way better. So part of doing this is trusting what you know. You know how a second ago I said, you know how many beats are in a quarter note, you know there's 4 beats in a whole note, that kind of thing. You got to trust how much you know. You've also got to trust that your hands can do stuff. You know, in the middle of an audition, we're usually pretty darn scared and the adrenaline's flowing and everything like that. This is when all those years of practice and private lessons will actually come out of you without you knowing it. So there has to be a level of trust that you have for yourself. And so if you remind yourself, when you're practicing sight reading, I want you to remind yourself over and over that I actually know most of this stuff. I just got to look at the little stuff I don't know. This is what, again, is going to separate the people that make high scores on their sight reading and the people that make low scores. Now, I'll talk about scores a lot, but I also want you to remember what I said a few minutes ago, that when you sight read well, you become a musician that other people want to hire. A lot of the gigs that I play, we walk in, we play one rehearsal, we play the concert, we take our paycheck, and we go home. I'm a freelance musician. Here's the thing. Yes, often they send us the music ahead of time. Often we have an opportunity to practice it, but not always. You know, what do I do if I get called in to do a recording session? When I walk in, sit down, and they hand me music, and they say, okay, play. That's when my ability to sight read really comes in handy. So again, if you're a 6th grade student, if you're a 12th grade student, if you're a 30-year-old musician, these are really important things for you to study and know. I promise you it will benefit you. So I think that basically we've covered the approach to sight reading, how I want you to think about it. And so let's talk about what goes into sight reading. So, would you love my very, very fancy sight reading posters that I made? All right, when you're a younger student and they teach you to sight read, they teach you the most important things. And I'm always going to say, like 100 times in this hour, I'll say, oh, the most important thing is this. Well, the truth is it's all important. But honestly, the most important thing from the very, very, very beginning is that you get the key signature. Now, you've probably spent a lot of time studying key signatures. Quick, what's in G major? What's in E minor? Here's the thing. I'm going to say something a little controversial. Your teachers may listen to this and go, oh, she's crazy. I could not care less whether or not you know that D major has 2 sharps in it, F sharp and C sharp. I could not care less if you know that C major has no sharps and no flats. Now I'm going to assume that you know most of those. But when you look at a piece of music to sight read, do not waste one split hair of a second thinking about that. Instead, I want you to immediately think what your hand has to do to make that happen. Now, I am a string player, so I'll talk a lot about violin, cello, and bass, but this video is actually great for all musicians. But I won't lie to you, I have no clue how to do this on flute or clarinet or guitar. I can tell you that on the cello, it's more important. If I look at a piece of music and there's 2 sharps, I have to instantly think extension fingering on the bottom 2 strings. I have to immediately think 3rd finger on the top 2 strings. That is the important thing. What does your hand have to do to make that key signature come out in your playing? And remember I said don't waste a single split hair of a second worrying about the other stuff. This comes down to time. Now, if you're getting hired to play a recording session, you know, they may give you 5 minutes. So that's a lot of time. But if you're playing an audition, if you're in an all-state audition, it might be 60 seconds. It might be 30 seconds. You do not have any of it to waste. So when it comes to the key signature, I want you to start now in your daily sight reading practice, which I'm hoping you're going to do after this. I want you to start thinking, what does my hand need to do? When I see 4 flats, I know that I can only play 1 open string or 2 open strings. I know that I have to play low first fingers. What do you have to do on the violin? You know, on the violin, you have an E string, an A string, a D string, and a G string. If I have 4 flats, you can't play any of those three of those open strings. So you have to tell yourself, don't play the open strings. Playing within your key signature is one of the very, very first things they're going to assume when you sight read. So you think about that left hand, think about what you need to do with it to make it work. Now, the time signature and the tempo, when you look at your music, the time signature, again, I don't really care if you can tell the difference between 3/4 and 4/4 and 2/4. What I do care is that you know what gets one beat. So often, it doesn't really matter if you're at a gig or in an audition, somebody's going to give you the beat. They're going to say, okay, let's get ready to start playing. Maybe they'll hold up a metronome. Maybe a conductor will stand in front of you. And they'll go, 1, 2, ready, play. Well, guess what? If you don't know what that 1, that 2, and that ready means, you're in big trouble. You need to know, is that the quarter note or is it the 8th note? So when you look at your time signature, sorry, I'm having screen issues. When you look at that time signature, I want you to think, what gets the beat? That's all that matters. Now, but the tempo's kind of funny because often your music won't tell you what the tempo is. So if you have a judge that's listening to you and judging you and writing down a score, maybe part of what they're actually looking for is, can you tell what the tempo is? So I'm going to give you some little hints. I learned these when I was at music camp 1,000 years ago. You don't have to memorize every tempo that's out there, but I want you to think about a quarter note equals 60. If a quarter note equals 60, that's 1 second. Now, used to be, I'm kind of old, we used to wear watches, and we can look at our watch. Sometimes in schools, you would have the clock up on the side of the wall. If you know what 60 is, oh, now you're there. Like, you've already got half your issue solved. Because if you know 60, and I'm probably a little fast right now, then if your music says a quarter note equals 120, you just double it. There's this little thing you can do to figure out 90, which is where you do triplets and you do 2 of each one. I won't waste your time with that, but here's what you need to know. As long as you get close, you're fine. The only thing they're going to judge you on is if you're way off. If it says quarter note equals 144 and you go 1, 2, 3, oh, that's going to be some low notes on your tempo score, and that's what you want to really avoid. So again, it's just honing in on what's important. All right, accidentals. Now, so if you got the key signature and you've already told your left hand what to do, life is good. You got your tempo, you got your time signature, you're going along. So an accidental is the first time really a judge can tell if you're really paying attention. So I love accidentals and sight reading because I kind of feel like it's my opportunity to prove to you I know what I'm doing. Now, if you remember, back in the beginning of the video, I talked about studying your music spatially. I wish I had a big piece of music here I could show you. This is where that's really going to work. This is where, when you have your 30 seconds or your 60 seconds, and you're studying your piece of music, I want you to notice those accidentals, like they're big flashing lights. And I want you to think to yourself, end of the second line, I've got an F sharp. Beginning of the middle of the page, you don't have to count lines, don't waste that kind of time. Beginning of the middle of the page, somewhere here, I've got a G double sharp, something weird like that. And then quickly, make sure you remind yourself what your hand has to do that. Because if you're playing along in D major and you're extending your 4th finger on the bottom 2 strings and life is good, and all of a sudden you have F natural, you have to remind your hand, pull it back. Those little tiny split-second reminders, I promise you, short term they'll stick in your brain. I don't care if you remember tomorrow what it was, but I just need you to stick that accident in your head. I need you to know where on the piece of paper it is and make it happen. So accidental is your first chance to really show them that you're paying attention. All right, so shifting. So, and again, you know, so my friends on the flute and the clarinet, I'm sorry that this won't help you so much, but let's talk about shifting on a string instrument. When you're sight reading, this is what always happens. People see the shift and they go, oh man, 1st position to 4th position. Now let's go back. This is just like the key signatures. I could not care less if you know what number position to what number position. Unless your learning is really, really keyed into that, don't waste a hair of a split second thinking about that. I do want you to know what note goes to what note and what finger goes to what finger. Here's the thing though, that is not where people mess up. Everybody does really well pretty much. When they see that shift, they go, oh, and they freak out, they study it real quick, and they've got it. Going up the shift, people rarely miss it. It's the coming back down that they forget, because as they're studying their sight reading and as their adrenaline's all flowing and the clock is ticking, they like figure out that beginning sight reading, the beginning of the shift, and then they go, okay, oh, look, there's another accidental I forgot. Oh, what about this? What about this? And they forget to figure out how to come back down. This is like climbing a ladder, my friend. You got to know how to go up, and you've got to know how to come back down. If you let me judge an audition, and if students come in, and in the sight reading excerpt, they shift up and they shift back down without even a hesitation, I'm always like, oh, score, 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 check, check. That's a kid who really knows what they're doing and who paid attention and figured out the entire part of the shift. So I do, when I'm starting to teach my students sight reading, I do a whole lot of what note to what note, what finger to what finger. And we're going to talk about that in a minute in terms of you're practicing your sight reading, how to approach it. That kind of thing, those thoughts will go away as you get better and better and better. So, because again, that's one of those things you don't want to waste a hair of a split of a second on. But in the beginning, that's how you've got to pay attention to your shifting. All right, rhythms. So, I said in the beginning of this whole thing that you know how many beats are in a quarter note, you know how many beats are in a whole note. The thing about rhythms is embedded in our learning as students. And I don't care what kind of learning you did. I don't care if you're a Suzuki kid. I don't care if you learned improvisation from the very beginning. I don't care if you're an essential elements kid. You have certain things that are kind of dug into your brain. 4-4 works great for us. We understand it. 3-4 makes us do a little bit like this, but we kind of got it. But we have certain rhythms that really work for us. But we have certain rhythms that kind of catch us by surprise. And the truth of the matter is it's different for different people. So if I line up 3 people here, if I line up my friend Michael with his guitar and my friend Stephanie with her instrument, and we talk about rhythms, I guarantee you we'll each have something different that trips us up. Now, for me, I'll tell you what trips me up. I am crazy good at dotted rhythms. As long as it's bump, ba-bump, 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 man, I can sight read that all day long. What I'm not good at is when you turn it around. We call it a Scottish snap. It's the short, then the long, so it's like the 8th note, then the dotted quarter note, or the 16th note, then the dotted 8th note. It's ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Those mess with my head. I don't know why, but they mess with my head. So through a lot of years of figuring it out and trial and error, I kind of know which ones mess with me, which rhythms. But now, how do you learn that? How are you going to figure out? Because that's a lot of trial and error. I'm 52 years old. You don't have time to do all that. You probably got an all-state audition next year you want to worry about. So you have to figure out what you're good at and what you're bad at, rhythm-wise. But I actually have a better idea than figuring it out. If you can figure it out, that's great. But instead, what if we make you like the rhythm king or the rhythm queen of your entire orchestra? So, see this book? This is like the greatest book ever. I did not write this book. I do not get any money if you go buy this book. But basically, most people have it because it's kind of a basic first scale book. And for scales, arpeggios, and scales and thirds, this is a great book for string players. So for your beginners, I highly recommend it. However, in the beginning of the book, what a lot of people skip, what they don't realize, is that there's all these pages of rhythm exercises. Now, I started years ago. When I found them, I thought to myself, I had this idea that if you gave a student 1 line a week, no big deal, not something they have to stress out over, 1 line every week, maybe 2 lines if it's kind of simple, what would happen? And what was really neat was to watch my students throughout the weeks and the months and the years. Their rhythm capability just went like this. what ended up happening when they did these is they didn't have any weak areas. They didn't have any soft spots where they were likely to fall into a hole when it comes to a rhythm and sight reading. And it's very simple. You just pick a string, pick a note. If you're playing flute, pick a G. I don't care what note it is. And set your metronome and play it. They start off really easy. They start off 4/4, literally whole notes and half notes. And these things, as you go on, they get a little bit more complicated and a little bit more complicated. And by the time you get to page 5 and 6 of them, you're actually reading and learning some really complex rhythms. So when you're done with that, maybe you do a line a day or 3 measures a day, just a little bit every day. Within a couple of years, you become crazy good at sight reading rhythms. Now, do you know how hireable that makes you as a musician? You may only be a 10th grader, but if somebody needs somebody that can come in and really sight read something, this kind of thing makes you somebody that they will pay money for, money to just to hire you. So I want you to consider actually doing a deep dive into learning rhythms. This is again something, yes, it will help you big time on an audition, but this will help you be a better musician. It'll crack your technique wide open. Dynamics. Now, my question for you is, how important are dynamics in a sight reading excerpt? What do you think? So normally when I do this lecture, I'm doing it in front of a whole bunch of kids, and normally they're getting ready for an all-state audition. Here in Georgia, our all-state orchestras, no matter what you play, are shockingly competitive. Like, I'm not exaggerating, they'll have 200 middle school violinists show up for maybe 30 spots. It's really competitive, and they all play really, really, really well. When I'm teaching that class, I usually do this thing where I talk about scoring, and when I talk about the importance of 1 point. The truth is, the importance of 1 point that's everything in every audition you will ever take. It's also everything when you get hired to a gig and you go for that first time or that second time, people are paying attention. When you start making mistakes, when you start falling into holes, they notice that and they just think to themselves, oh, she's super nice, but you know, we're paying, time is money, hire her maybe down the road. So it's really, really important that you think about the small stuff. 1 point is the difference between making all-state and not making all-state. 1 point might be the difference between you getting a full scholarship to college and not. So I want you to fight for every point you can get. So where's a really good place to fight for points? Dynamics. I have judged many, many, many auditions for different things. Youth orchestra, you name it, all-state. It's amazing how many kids will come in and they really pull themselves together and they're nervous and they're scared and they do a pretty darn good job and they've got the key signature down and they hit those accidentals, but they completely and totally ignore the dynamics. And somewhere in their learning, they decided in their hierarchy of what's important that it was less important. Now, here's an interesting thing though. Sometimes your musicality on an audition counts more points than maybe the accidentals do. What you want to do is you want to show your judges that you're a musician. I promise you, if you actually go into an audition and you play super musically and it's beautiful and you put dynamics and some vibrato and you miss a couple of notes, you're going to get a higher score than someone who plays all the notes and rhythms perfect but plays it like a piece of cardboard. We are all musicians. We're here to make music. We respond to music. You show me a kid that, bless their hearts, they struggled with that A flat over there, but they threw a gorgeous crescendo in there and an even more gorgeous decrescendo at the end. Oh, score, 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 point, point, point. Dynamics are your perfect place to not only gather more points, but to show that you're a musician and to show that even through your fear, even through your adrenaline, that you know that playing music is what's the most important thing of all. Boeings. Okay, so now this, maybe if you're a trumpet player, at this point you would talk about breathing, where to put your breath. Maybe if you're a pianist, you would look at something else. So for string instruments though, bowings are kind of a funny thing. Many of our auditions are behind a screen. The truth is the judge may or may not even know. If it says down, up, they may or may not even know if you're going down, up, or up, down. Does it really matter? If musically you can't tell a difference, that may not matter so much. Now, if it's slurred 5 to a bow and you're not slurring, they can tell that. But for me, when it comes to bowings falls into the same category as rhythms. You can do 90% of the bowings that are thrown at you. You can slur, you can staccato, you can détaché, you can do all this cool stuff. But there's going to be some things that trip you up. How do you learn what trips you up? Remember my favorite book from a few minutes ago? So a lot of these rhythm exercises have bowings written in them. And for me, that was kind of a revelation. It was so neat to look at them and realize, because they don't all make sense, I won't lie to you. But to look at them and realize that being able to read those bowings, especially the ones that weren't intuitive, that made my students better musicians. It made them better sight readers. You need to know what's going to mess with you. Now, something I tell my students all the time, and this may sound really silly, but trust me, your head is really, really strong. Your brain is really, really strong. Sometimes you have to remind yourself who's in charge. You were the bow. Because if you're sight reading along, and again, we've got adrenaline flowing, you're freaking out, the clock is ticking. If you're playing along and you're doing all your slurs and you run out of bow, you need to be able to instantly change bows. Forget what the printed music says, and that's where your head will mess with you. Your head will be like, whoa, but wait, it's a down bow. You've got to keep going. Keeping going is a big hallmark of a really good sight reader, by the way. And so the more you study different bowings, the more you learn which ones might mess with you. And the more you learn that at some point you have to look down at your bow arm and go, no, I'm in charge, not you. You'd be amazed how often this thinks it's in charge. So then the better you will end up being when it comes to sight reading. Bowings, for me in sight reading, the biggest problem is just they can mess you up without you paying attention. Don't let them mess you up. My favorite thing in sight reading, honestly my favorite thing, is strange things. So I actually have this thing all written out, and one of my students made up a sentence, and it's keep that awful silly red dog backstage, and that's the first letter of everything we've talked about here. And the last one's backstage, S stands for strange things. So I want you to think, what could be strange in music? What could be sitting there on that printed piece of paper that you weren't expecting? It could be a fermata. It could be a ritardando. It could be a repeat sign. It could be 12 measures of rest. There's a lot of strange things. And what you have to do is you have to notice them and play them. That's the first thing. But I also want you to be reminded that how important they are. I had a student once who now plays with the London Symphony. And in 7th grade, she auditioned for Allstate, and she got first chair on string bass. And her name is Salima. And Salima, in her sight reading, I found out later from the judges that the sight reading had a dies al fine in it. Now, if you're a professional musician, that's no big deal. Maybe if you're a high school student, that's no big deal. She was a 7th grader. She had been playing literally 16 months. I don't even know to this day. I was her private teacher, and I don't know to this day how she knew to do it. But she just went through her sight reading perfectly, and she did that dies al fine, and she was the only person that day to do it in the middle school bass audition. First chair, check. So the moral of that story, though, is that even though she was worried about her notes, even though she was worried about her bowings, she paid attention to the strange things. If it's in the sight reading, they want you to do it. Think about stuff in sight reading sometimes as being like a trick question. So if you have a piece of music for sight reading and there's a repeat sign at the very end, and they don't say anything to you about it, should you do it? Absolutely. If I'm judging you, I'm sitting back going, okay, let's see who knows what a repeat sign is. Do it, do it, do it. Now, Oh, by the way, so I'm at the violin shop today, and we're on a train track, and you have to excuse the train has picked this time to come by. So if I had a violin, I'd play a little Orange Blossom Special for you, but I don't. Okay, I think it's quieted down now. That's what happens when you do stuff at the violin shop. So there used to be, back to the strange things. Let's talk about rests for a second. Used to be like a standard rule was if it's if it's 4 measures of rest or more, skip it. If it's 4 measures or less, count them. Here's the thing. You kind of have to know where your sight reading music is coming from. If your music is out of a regular book, or even better yet, my favorite, like out of a true piece of symphonic music. I love to make my kids sight read like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, stuff like that. Those rests are part of the actual piece of music. That may or may not be something that you would want to pay attention to so much. If there's 22 measures of rest in the middle of it, I'm pretty sure your judge doesn't want to sit there while you count that. Here in Georgia, though, when we have all-state auditions, they actually compose the all-state sight reading for that specific event. And I want you to think about that for a second. They compose it for the audition. What that means is there's not a single thing in there they don't want in there. So if your music is like that, do it. If you're in doubt, count the rests. If you're in doubt, always do the repeats. If they don't want you to, they'll interrupt you and stop you and tell you to go on. And that's no big deal. You won't get penalized for that or anything like that. So the strange things, again, for me, they're kind of like, you know how I said accidentals is your first opportunity to let them know that you're really paying attention and you really know what you're doing? Well, the strange things is the exact same thing. And when I do them, I always feel a little proud of myself. I'm like, ooh, I nailed that for Mata. I wonder if everyone else did. Notice the strange things. So we have key signatures, time signatures and tempo, accidentals, shifting if you're a string player, rhythms, dynamics, bowings, and strange things. Now, the question is, what do you do with all this? Because if you're sitting here watching this, and I'm just going to take a quick second to tell everybody that when this is all said and done, I'm going to put this on the Huthmaker Violins YouTube page so that it can be revisited. My hope is that there's so much information in here that just one listen won't do it. And that you can share it with other teachers and other students. But the question of the day is, so I've dumped all this information on you, and I've told you how I want your brain to work with sight reading. How do you practice that? All right, the first thing is I want you to think about an elephant, a life-size elephant made of chocolate. How do you eat it? I'm going to hand you a fork and a knife, and I'm going to say, eat the elephant. What do you do? If you're smart, you go, I can't eat it. It's an elephant. It's too big. And the answer is always, you do a little bit each day. A little bit each day is the secret to everything. And when it comes to music, in general, see, my music teacher's coming out of me. I know we're supposed to be talking about sight reading, but let me just say, when it comes to music, if you do one scale every day, one scale, one arpeggio every day, one scale, one arpeggio, one scale in thirds, now we're cooking with gas. You just pick one every day. Your technique will go like this. If you pick a line of rhythms every day, your technique will go like this. You will get better and better. The same goes for your sight reading. You don't have to do it for 30 minutes every day. It's not even as helpful if you do it for like an hour once a week. What's helpful is that every day you pick one sight reading excerpt and you apply these things. And then you go on to the next day and the next day. And I want you to think about that, because if you do that for a year, that's over 350 sight reading excerpts that you did. That knowledge just builds up, that technique just builds up whether you wanted it to or not. But you have to challenge yourself. Now, there's different ways to approach sight reading. Do not sight read music, you already know. That sounds kind of silly, but it's true, you know. And I want you to actually sight read music that's hard. Now, some of you have seen these books. You can buy all-state sight reading excerpts. This is a great, great, great book if you don't have it. I want to show you. And it literally is, on every page, there's 2 excerpts for you to sight read. Here's the thing to know though. You do not open it, sight read it, and then go back and practice it and learn it. The practicing it and the learning it, that's a waste of your time. Do not waste a hair of a split second doing that. Sight reading is, you open it, you give yourself some time, you play it. If you can, take a few seconds to see what you missed, and then you go on to another one. Now, if you're new to sight reading, when I teach my sight reading class, one of the things that we do is we actually start with no instrument whatsoever. We start with pen and paper, or pencil and paper. So if you open a piece of music and you look at it, just eyeballs, because again, having your instrument in your hand can be really distracting. I don't want you doing any of this fingering business where you're trying to like finger your way through the music. If you instead just use your eyeballs and look at it, tell yourself, look at that key signature, what does my hand need to do? Look at that time signature, what gets a beat? And you work your way through the thing. Well, in my class that I teach, the first time we do it, we take like 2, 3, 4 minutes, as long as you need. We have them close the music or turn it over and then write down on a piece of paper. What was the key signature? What does that mean your hand has to do? What was the time signature? Now, you can see where that first excerpt may take 10 minutes. But what happens is then we do it 2 more times. By the time you've done that, by the time you've taken 3 or even 4 sight reading excerpts and you've studied them, you've written them down, don't time yourself yet, it's not important yet, then what you start to notice is your weak spots. You notice, man, I am a rock star. I got the key signature right every single time. Woo, I got the time signature right, but I missed accidentals every single time. You'll start to see, because you'll miss the same things and you'll get the same things. That tells you where to put your focus. And this is where a little bit of discipline comes in, because it's way more fun to practice the easy stuff, and it's way more fun to practice the stuff you're good at. But if you want to be a rock star sight reader when it's all said and done, you want to look at those things that were giving you a hard time. Now, after you've done some, let's pretend you did my method. Let's pretend you did it and you wrote them down and you figured out some of those things. Then I want you to start timing yourself. And give yourself plenty of time at the beginning. Give yourself 2 minutes to study it. And then after a little while, I want you to actually cut it down, cut that time down, and set yourself for a minute. Now, when you start doing this, get rid of the pen and the paper, because that's going to slow you down. But what I love to do with my students is show them a piece of music, and I say, you have 1 minute, and then I close it, and I make them say it to me. 2 sharps, I have to do this with my hand. Corner note gets a beat. I make them go down the list. And then we pick another one. Now, this is again where discipline kind of comes into it. And I want you to think just in terms of how badly you want to be good at this. Because if you're really going to be paying attention and really applying yourself, now cut it down to 30 seconds. And let's make it even a little harder. So, you know, I keep holding up this book. I got a stack of music here to show you. So if you're using a book like this, these excerpts are 3 lines long. That's lovely. When you are first starting to practice sight reading, that's great. However, I've never been in an audition where a sight reading excerpt was that short. So when my students get good, when they get to where in 30 seconds they can study this and then tell me everything that's in it, then we start doing 2 in a row. And we back off, we give them a minute or a minute and a half. And what the goal is, we want to get them to where I can close the book and I can say, what is it? They can go, the first one has 2 sharps, the second one has 3 flats, the first one's in 2/4, the second one's in 6/8. Can you see where, with enough practice, you can get to where you can do that on the entire piece? Now, let me tell you, when you've told your head what's in there, when you've brought your attention to it, I promise you 99.9% of the time, it will come out of your hands. Your hands have the knowledge, your brain's got the knowledge. It's just kind of like lining it all up. All right, so if you want to be an okay sight reader, that's how you approach this. But what if you really want to be a great sight reader? So I mentioned that in Georgia, our all-state auditions, let me tell you, they are not for the faint of heart. They are so difficult and they're so competitive. You can't just be a good sight reader. You've got to be a rock star sight reader. So how do I make my students rock star sight readers. Actually, they do it themselves. You know, they do all the work and they do all the practice. I just encourage them heavily. I actually ask them to sight read music that's harder and harder and harder. And I tell them this is very simple. You want the hardest music you ever have to sight read to be either in the privacy of your music studio or the privacy of your bedroom. Because it doesn't matter if you play a ton of ugly, awful notes when you're practicing. I don't ever want you to go to an audition and see the hardest sight reading you ever saw. So how do you increase the difficulty level of your sight reading? Pick hard music. Even better yet, pick music that's not even for your instrument. So you want to get really fun? My dad was always a choir director growing up. We always had hymn books in the house. If you have a hymnal, open it up, sight read some hymnal music, because let me tell you, this wasn't written for violin or cello. The notes will go lower than your instrument goes. They'll go higher than you're used to going. They'll look weird. It's lined up because it's a piano part, right? So practice sight reading some of those. Speaking of piano parts, great sight reading, because it will mess with your head. You will see notes that don't exist on your instrument again. You will see runs that just scare the mess out of you. That's great. That's what I want from you. Now, I am a torturous, mean teacher. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. I didn't bring it to show to you, but I have the best book ever at home. It's a book of 20th century double bass symphonic excerpts. Now, that may not mean anything to you, but let me tell you about 20th century music. A lot of it doesn't even look like music. It's not even real notes. It's got stuff like a black thing of ink from one side to the other that just says, play something. Like, it's weird, it's bizarre. I make my more advanced students sight read out of that. Because again, the hardest sight reading they're ever gonna see is gonna be in my studio. And I promise you then, when they come out of that next audition, they're gonna be like, Anna, that was a piece of cake. And that is what I'm going for. I want it to be a piece of cake. So I know that was a lot to throw at you. What I'm hoping is, I'm hoping that you can kind of see how fulfilling and fun learning to sight read is. Yes, it takes work, but just remember the chocolate elephant. We're just gonna do a little bit every day. And I promise you, you will get better and better and better and better. And that way, when you go to your auditions, they're not going to be as stressful. You're going to score better. And when you go to play gigs, you're going to play better. People around you are going to notice that you don't ever mess up. That's what you want, because then they're going to call their friends and say, hey, you know that person? Give them a shout. They're a really good bass player. You want to hire them for your orchestra. This is my goal for you. My goal for you is for you to be a great sight reader. My goal for you is to have a reputation where people want to hire you, and that you can feel really confident in your sight reading ability. Now, if you have any questions about any of this, I love talking about sight reading because I'm kind of a nerd. So again, I'm Anna Hethmaker. I'm at Hethmaker Violins, and I am going to put this video, like I said, on our YouTube channel as soon as it's done. And actually in another 15 minutes or so, I'm going to do a second video on how to take an audition. So if you have issues with stage fright, with learning how to prepare for that actual audition, we all know auditions can change your life, literally, then hang out, and in a few minutes I'll be back on and I'll do that. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really, really glad to see you all. Hey Lynn, hey Bond, great to see you guys, and I'll talk to you later.